The microphone catches every word. Take that off before you embarrass this family. 1,000 people are watching, and the ones at the back stop laughing so they can hear it better. That lace was sewn by hand the winter before her grandmother died. The man she came here to marry has just called it a rag, in front of all of them. Her chin comes up. It is the last thing she still controls, so it stays there while he steps away from her, slow and careful, the way a man backs away from something he is afraid might stain his suit. If you have ever stood in a room that made up its mind about you before you opened your mouth, you already know this woman. Stay with her a while. Subscribe, not because anyone is asking you to, but because there are other women who gather in this quiet corner for the same reason, and a night like this is easier to carry when you are not the only one still holding it. In a side room off the Great Hall, Neesha stood with her grandmother's lace against her skin and breathed the way she taught frightened patients to breathe. In through the nose. Hold. Out slow. Cedar came off the fabric, the smell of the drawer in Mira's flat, where the gown had waited 40 years for a granddaughter to grow into it. Nothing else in this building smelled of anything but the shop floor. That was a small thing to hold, and something that size was exactly what she needed. The morning had been rehearsed as a good day. Rehearsal was a thing she was good at. A surgeon learns to walk into the worst room on the ward wearing a face that steadies everyone in it, and worst rooms were something she had walked into by the hundred. A wedding she could manage. 1,000 strangers and a family who would spend a year looking at her the way you look at a mark on good linen. All of it was manageable, so long as her hands stayed still and her chin stayed level, and she did not think too hard about the gown that was supposed to be here. The couture dress had died 4 days ago. A steamer left too hot, they said. An accident. Vivian's apology had come with the smoothness of a woman who had never once been sorry in her life, and there had been no time to replace it, of course. None at all. In the deep animal place that reads a face before the monitor catches up, Neesha had known no steamer ever touched that dress. Known it cold. Smiled anyway. Said it was fine. That was the part she kept turning over. There, in the cedar-smelling quiet. She had said it was fine. The door opened without a knock. One of the bridesmaids, a cousin of Dick's, holding a champagne flute she did not need, looked Neesha over from hem to collar and let her mouth do something almost like a smile. "Oh," the girl said. "You're actually wearing it. It was my grandmother's." No explanation of the dress had been the promise she made herself that morning. The explanation left her mouth anyway. A small pleading thing crept into her own voice that she hated on the spot. "It's very vintage," the cousin said and drifted out, and the word hung in the room like smoke. Down at her wrist, the lace showed one uneven stitch near the cuff, where Mira's hand had slipped some winter 30 years before either of them was born to this day. She did not cry. There was a single breath in which she might have, and she spent it on the stitch instead, and then she straightened. They were ready for her. Down the long aisle she went alone. No one was there to give her away. The woman who would have done it had been Ash for 2 years, carried home in a box to a country she kept promising to visit and never had. So the walk was hers by herself, under a ceiling of gold that had watched 3 generations of these families marry each other, in a hall built to make a person feel small, and her chin stayed exactly where she had decided it would stay. Quiet came over the room as she passed. Not silence. Silence would have been kinder. It was the sound 1,000 people make when they are trying not to be heard, the crackle of a program folded in half, one heel against marble, a breath drawn to carry a whisper only as far as the next ear. Pieces of it reached her. Is that lace or a curtain? Where is the real dress? Poor thing, she doesn't even know. Onward she walked. Worse rooms than this had not stopped her. Dick waited at the front in a suit that cost more than her first year of medical school, and when she reached him his eyes went not to her face but to her collarbone, to the fray in the old lace there, and a year of her life rearranged itself in the set of his jaw. Cruel, he had never quite been. He had only ever been about to choose, and every single time, she had told herself he would choose her. "Neesha," he said low, meant for her alone. "What are you doing to me?" Not a question. No answer. She would have counted as one. In the front pew, Vivian rose. Slowly, the way old money does everything, and the whole hall turned toward her the way iron turns to a magnet. No, Vivian said. Only that, at first. Then, to her son, gently, as though breaking hard news. Look at her. Look at what she chose to wear to stand beside our name. She isn't even trying to be one of us anymore. Somewhere to the left, a laugh. Then another, given permission by the first. Inside the noise, understanding arrived with the flat clarity she kept for a chest opened on her table. A whole life spent deciding, in the worst minute of a stranger's, who was worth saving. Never once a hesitation. Not one person in this gold room. Not the man in front of her. Not the mother rising like a verdict. Not a single guest lifting a phone to catch her face would ever have put her on that list. Dick stepped back from her. One step. Careful. His head turned toward the microphone clipped by the altar, and his voice went out over all of them. Over the gold and the orchids and the 1,000 held breaths. Take that off before you embarrass this family. The laughter broke fully then. It struck the far walls and came back. In the middle of it she stood, in her grandmother's hands, and did not fold, and did not run, and kept breathing. In through the nose, hold. While the man she had loved looked at her the way a person looks at a spill he wants somebody else to clean. Then the temperature of the room changed. No draft did it. Every kind of cold a body can make, she had felt. This was none of them. And it came under the laughter the way water comes under a door, touched the back of her neck, and lifted the fine hairs along her arms beneath 40-year-old lace. Down the aisle the tall candles leaned as one, though no window had opened. A woman near the front stopped laughing. Then the man beside her. Row by row the quiet rolled back down the hall, and this time the word for it was the right one at last. Silence. At the far end of the aisle, the great doors she had walked through alone began, with no hand upon them, to move. The doors did not swing. Instead they drew back, the way a held breath finally leaves the body, and the cold came through the gap ahead of the man who walked behind it. Into the room he came without hurry. That was the first wrong thing. Never once had a room like this waited on anyone who did not own it, and it waited on him now. 1,000 faces turning together, the laughter thinning in their throats before the reason reached them. His suit was ivory. Pale, wrong for a funeral and wrong for a wedding both, the color of a thing kept a long time out of the sun. Silver swept back from his temples, though nothing else about his face would agree to an age. The same aisle they had all watched Neesha walk alone carried him now, and where she had gathered whispers, he gathered only quiet. Neesha did not move. Past the humiliation and out the other side something in her had gone, into the flat, cool place she stood in when a patient was coding and panic was a luxury she could not afford. The walk to this altar had been spent deciding she needed no one to come for her. Whatever happened, she would leave this hall on her own 2 feet, and no one alive would ever be able to say she had been carried out of it. She held to that now the way she held the lace at her wrist. The cold reached her while she was still holding it, and her body knew him a full breath before her mind would allow it. Around him, the room remembered its fear. A senator's wife pressed back into her husband's shoulder. A man who had been filming lowered his phone, as if it had turned hot in his hand. These were people who had never once stood in a room where their money did not speak first, and the new arithmetic of the place reached them before a single word was said. On her feet still, Vivian went the gray of old paper and reached blindly for the pew in front of her. A step toward him Dick took. "Sir, this is a private." Not so much as a turn of the head answered him, and the sentence died where Dick stood, the rest of it swallowed like something he thought better of. The last of the distance to the altar he crossed. Then he turned, unhurried, until his back was to the whole gold room and his body stood between Neesha and every eye that had spent 10 minutes feeding on her.
Such a small thing.
A man turning around. 100 strangers she had shielded with her own 2 hands. Never once in 33 years had another person stepped between her and the thing that was hurting her. "Take your time," he said.
Low.
Built for one listener. "They will wait." To the family he spoke then, and no heat was in it, which was worse than heat. "You had something rare in this room tonight." To Dick he said it, to Vivian, to all of them at once. "And you spent the whole evening trying to make it small enough to throw away without anyone noticing. I have watched men lose fortunes with more grace than you have lost her." Vivian's mouth opened. He waited, patient as winter, and it closed again. The coat came off his own shoulders. Warm nowhere. Cold as a window left open through a long winter, it settled over Neesha's, and he let the weight of it stay. Cedar rose off her grandmother's lace to meet the cold coming off him. Two things with no business sharing a breath, and she leaned back into the shelter of it before the part of her that refused rescue could catch her at it. That was the thing she would turn over later, alone, when there was time. No one would carry her out of this, so she had sworn. Leaned into him anyway. Down at her his gaze went, and the room reached the particular stillness a room only reaches when 1,000 people are all waiting to understand the same thing at once. A tear had let go of her lashes without leave. Before it could fall the length of her cheek and hand them one more thing to enjoy, he caught it on the edge of one finger, the way a person lifts a thing decided against breaking. No one breathed. Close enough now she could see it. High on the ridge of his cheekbone, thin as a thread, a line of silver, where skin had been opened once and closed wrong. That line she knew. She had made it, or made what could be made of the ruins someone else left, with a hand steadier than she felt, in a dark she could still smell, 26 months and a whole other life ago. A man on her table, a wound that would not close, eyes open past every reason they had to shut. A man she had decided, without one question about what he was worth saving. His shape formed on her mouth with no sound behind it.
"You," she said.
Barely a word at all. "You did not ask what I was that night." So low he said it that the whole straining hall got nothing, and the words were only hers. "You only kept me breathing. I told you then I do not forget a debt like that." For a year she had been told, in 100 small and smiling ways, that tolerance was her good fortune. Now she stood in a dead woman's lace, under a stranger's coat, the cold of him against the back of her neck and the cedar of her grandmother caught in her throat, and understood that the most feared thing in this city had crossed it to put himself between her and the people who had called her nothing, and had done it because once, in the worst minute of his life, she had looked at him bleeding into the dark and chosen him. Like ice the stillness broke. Not with sound, with a shift of weight, everywhere at once, 1,000 people deciding what they had seen and none of them sure. Something like his voice, Dick found. Neesha.
Thin.
Reaching. Neesha, whatever he's told you. At him she did not look. The lesson was arriving in real time. Looking was no longer required. Behind the man in ivory the great doors still stood open on the dark, and past them, at the curb, engines she had not heard arrive idled low in the Georgia night. An hour ago this hall had been where she came to be married and made small. What she was about to walk back out of it as, she did not yet know. You stayed with her through the worst thing that has ever happened to her in front of other people. That mattered. What comes next is quieter and stranger. The night she once kept a dying man alive in the dark, and what it will cost them both now that he has come to pay her back. Subscribe and keep your seat because the reason he is truly here changes the shape of everything you have heard so far. The memory took her the way deep water takes a swimmer who has stopped fighting it. 26 months. Half the grid had gone to the floor under a summer storm. The generators coughed and failed and coughed again, and the trauma bay dropped dark between one heartbeat and the next, then came back the low red of battery light. Through the loading dock they brought him. Men who gave no names, who set him on her table, stepped back to the wall, and watched her instead of him. A wound below the ribs was bleeding, and it would not close. Wounds that fought her, she had packed before. Never one trying, on its own, to knit itself shut and failing, the torn edges reaching for each other, falling back. Her fingers found the reason. A sliver of metal, pale as a fishbone, lodged where a man's heart should have quit an hour before. Silver, she would think later. Some alloy of it. No body she had ever been trained on had held such a thing. Out it came because that was the job. The wound closed over her hand as she drew back, closed clean, closed fast, closed the way skin does in a film run backward. On her glove his blood sat too dark, moved too slow, gave off nothing of the iron every other pint she had ever held had carried. Copper and cold was the smell of it. 2 days it would take to wash from the creases of her knuckles. Open the whole time his eyes stayed. Past the point they should have shut. Past the point anything living stays anywhere. With a steadiness that should have driven her from the room, he watched her work, and once, over the ruin of his side, she looked back at him and made the only call she knew how to make. Security she did not call. The chart she did not write true. When the men carried him out before the lights came back, she stood in the dark with his blood drying on her hands and told no one, then or after. Stranger things than a man who would not die, she had guarded. Never one who looked at her as if she were the strange thing. The hall came back around her. The gold, the orchids, the coat on her shoulders, the cold of him near. He had been speaking. Only the end had reached her, and the end was enough. For 3 generations, he was saying to Vivian, to the gray-faced man beside her who owned the linens on every hospital bed in the state. Your grandfather borrowed from older houses than the ones on your letterhead. Your father did the same, and hid it better. The paper that keeps this family standing has been in my hands longer than you have been alive. No rise came into his voice. Not once did his voice rise. I have decided to stop holding it up. Whether another man might have mentioned in that tone. Somewhere in the pews a phone was already lit. Someone's broker, someone's lawyer. The first of them, understanding the floor, had gone out from under a fortune while they sat and watched. A sound with no word in it came out of Vivian. You called her cheap. At the mother he looked now, and the winter came off him in a way the whole front row felt. You will have a great deal of time to consider what that word is worth. Then he turned from all of them as though they had already stopped existing, faced Neesha, and the most feared thing in the city lowered himself to one knee on the marble, in front of 1,000 people who had just watched him end a dynasty. Out of his coat came a small box, dark wood worn pale at the corners by other hands in other years. The box opened in his hands. The stone inside was not white. Soft rose, the color of the inside of a wrist. The color skin goes when you press it and let go, cut in a way no house still cut stones, held in a band gone thin with wearing. This has been in my blood longer than this state has had a name, he said. It was never for sale. I am not buying you, Neesha. I am asking. For it she did not reach. A woman made small for a year learns the difference between being wanted and being used, and that hard-won clarity was not going to slip now. Not even for the warm animal relief of being chosen in front of the people who had thrown her out. Her hands stayed at her sides. Why? She said. Not a plea. The question a surgeon asks before she agrees to open anyone. Because you had both hands inside the worst night of my life and never once asked what I was. His voice dropped until the words were only hers. In a very long life, you are the one thing I have found worth saving. I have been deciding it for 26 months, from a distance, badly. I would like to stop deciding from a distance. Inside what he had said, she heard what he had not. That he would outlast her. That the far bank of what she stood at the edge of was a country one of them could not follow the other into. In the cold coming off him and the cedar rising off her grandmother's lace she stood, and let herself, for the length of one breath, weigh the cost of it. The years. The aging she would do and he would not. The nights she would lie beside a thing that did not need sleep. She let him watch her weigh it, because a thing offered honestly deserves the same in return. I keep my work, she said. My name on it. My hands in it. I am not a thing you rescue and set on a shelf. I walked in here alone tonight. If I walk out with you, I walk out level or I walk out alone. Level, he said like a vow. Only the exit, she told herself she was taking. Even as the thought formed, the truth sat plain. The exit had nothing to do with why her hand was already lifting, already steady, already sliding into the cold of his. Then yes. It did not sound like surrender. A decision, rather, made by the only person in the building qualified to make it. He rose. No sweep of her off her feet, no turn to the crowd with a prize reclaimed. The old ring went onto her finger, cold and a perfect fit, which unsettled her more than a poor one would have, and then beside her he simply stood, both of them facing the open doors. So anyone still watching had to understand 2 people were what they were looking at, not a rescue. Toward the doors she stepped. He matched her. Not ahead, not behind. Level. Out of that hall she had walked level, and the year after it was spent keeping the word true. The gifts arrived the way other men's flowers arrive. A building. A car with a driver who never spoke. A wardrobe that appeared in a closet she had not opened. Most of it went back, quietly, the way she declined a second opinion no one had asked her for. The one thing she took on her own terms. Up on the south side the clinic went, in a squat brick box that had been a tire shop, and it took uninsured trauma. The knife wounds, the factory hands, the girls who came in at 3 in the morning with stories that did not match their bruises. The walls he paid for. Her own name went on the door. Ambani, in plain letters, no title, because the people who needed the place did not care what she was called, and the people who once had were no longer worth the paint. Let me staff the night shift, he said, that first week, watching her close a teenager's forearm at an hour when the rest of the city slept. You do not have to be the one awake. I have always been the one awake. No glance came up from the suture. You do not get to fix that. It is not broken. He did not argue. Across those months a lesson took in him. Giving was the only word he had for wanting, and almost none of it would she take. So a coat he kept holding in her doorway anyway, at the end of her worst nights, one she had not asked for, because standing in a doorway turned out to be a thing she would allow. That should have kept her careful. It did not. An evening came in the wet part of spring when nothing happened. The dangerous one. She would call it later. No crowd, no crisis, no one bleeding. North of the city, he had a house that held its cold like a stone church, and papers were all she had come to drop off. And then the rain came down too hard to drive in, and then there she sat in his kitchen while he made her a bowl of something he would never taste. That was the part that undid her. For a mouth that was not his, he cooked. At the stove he stood with his sleeves pushed back, made her food he had no use for, set it in front of her, and watched her eat it with the still attention of a man watching whether he had gone a long time without. The steam fogged the window. The old radiator knocked twice and went quiet. While she ate, he asked about the woman who had sewn the lace. Not the dress, the woman. In a year of that other family, no one had ever thought to ask. Mira's hands, she told him about, the crooked stitch near the cuff, the small flat in a city he had never seen, and more than she meant to came out of her, the way it does only with someone who has already watched the worst of her and stayed in the room. The silences she left he did not fill. He let them stay hers. Only grateful. She told herself she was grateful the way a patient is grateful, the way anyone is grateful to be fed on a bad night. A lie, and she knew it before the thought was done. Not staying had been the decision made driving over. Out loud, she said as much. To be safe. Then the rain kept on, and he did not ask her to stay, which was worse than asking, and stay she did. Awake she lay, on the cold side of a man whose body would never warm the sheets, and the not warmth of him beside her was the most frightening comfort she had ever known, because a cold that is still there in the morning is a kind of promise, and a whole life had trained her to expect the people beside her to be gone by the time she woke. The rupture came on an ordinary Tuesday, which is how the ones that matter tend to come. The arithmetic had done itself without her meaning to. Her own face caught in the clinic glass under the hard white light. The first gray at her temple, the fine lines her mother had worn at exactly this age, and the certainty landed flat as a diagnosis. Old was what she would grow in front of a man who never would. That night she brought it to him. No softening. The true things had never softened for her. "You will watch me age," she said. "You will watch me die. Unless—" There she let the word hang, unfinished, the way he had once let a word hang for her. "Unless I make you what I am." Very quiet now. "Say the rest of it. Turn me." 2 syllables. A chest she had opened with less fear than those cost her. Silent he was a long moment, and the silence had a shape, and the shape was no. "I will not," he said at last. "Not to keep you. Not to spare myself. You put your hands inside me on the worst night of my life, and you gave. You asked nothing. You took nothing. Everything we are began there. If I take your death from you, because I cannot bear to lose you, then I have made you the one thing you swore you would never be again, a thing that was taken." At her he looked, and for once the cold was all on the outside of him. "A long time ago, I decided what in this life was worth saving. Saving you was never going to mean keeping you forever. It means leaving the choice in your hands, even when the choice is to leave." Across the room, she went. No decision preceded it. Her feet moved while her mind still argued the point. Flat against his chest her hand landed, low, over the old ridge of scar where her fingers had once gone in after a sliver of silver and a life that should have ended on her table. It was the coldest part of him, the part she had made. Neither of them said anything. Everything a year had circled sat there under her palm, named at last without a single word, and the naming was quieter and larger than any promise ever shouted in a gold room. Over the place she had once saved, she kept her hand, and felt how much of her wanted to stay in that cold, silent house until she was old, and he was not. That was the thing that frightened her. Not his teeth. Not the cold off his skin. The wanting. The wanting did not go away. Running from it stopped, and in the weeks that followed it settled into something a whole life had not trusted, an ordinary calm. Sleep came on the cold side of the bed, and waking brought no surprise to find him still there. The clinic filled, and emptied, and filled. For 13 months the belief held that the worst thing had already happened to her in a gold room, and the rest was hers to build. The thread pulled on a slow Thursday. For an hour a woman had been sitting in the waiting room without signing the clipboard. The face came before the name, the wedding, the front pews, the banking family whose name got whispered like a rank. Among the uninsured and the bleeding Whitney Vandergriff sat, in a coat that cost more than the building, a leather folder held against her chest the way you hold a thing carried too far to set down. The right to hate this woman, Neesha had earned, rehearsed it, even, in the early months, the one Dick had been saving himself for. The chair beside the exam table she reached for instead, and pulled it out, the way she pulled one out for every frightened person who came through that door, her hands doing it before the old anger could catch them. "You're a hard woman to reach," Whitney said. "He keeps a wall around you. He keeps a wall around everything." Neesha sat. "You did not come to the South Side in that coat to talk about my husband's walls." The folder went onto the table between them. Whitney did not open it. "They told me you ruined that wedding yourself," she said. "That you fell apart, wore a rag, embarrassed everyone, and Dick did the kind thing by ending it. That was the story I was handed. I married it. I was supposed to." Her mouth moved, without sound for a moment. "About 8 months ago, I stopped being able to believe it. So, I started keeping things." Neesha opened the folder. Invoices. A florist's contract. A dressmaker's second, quieter contract. An email chain with Vivian's initials at the bottom, dated 11 days before the wedding, laying the whole thing out plainly, the way people write when certain no one beneath them will ever read it. No steamer's accident had killed the gown. On a schedule it had been ruined. Written like a scene, the altar had been, Where Vivian would stand, what she would say, the exact word cheap, chosen because it would travel. All of it built so the ending would look merciful and the Vandergrift money could arrive without a stain on it. A way to be rid of her that made him the wronged one. That was what Dick had needed. His mother had designed him one. One line reminded the dressmaker to build a sabotage as a fitting, so nothing would show on paper. To the last page she read. The fluorescent tube over the table ticked. Nothing tore. No sound came. The folder went down, its edges squared with 2 fingers the way she squared a chart, and the last warm, foolish part of her, the part that had spent a year quietly wondering whether she had somehow deserved it, went cold and clear and still. In the doorway stood Andreas. Doorways were a thing he had a way of being in. Most of it I have known for a year, he said. I did not bring it to you. You were building something. A reason to stop before you were ready to hold it. I was not going to hand you that. A pause with intention. Say the word, and there is no Russell name left in this city by morning. Not the company. Not the mother. Nothing. For one breath she wanted it. The clean animal sound of a door shutting on them forever. She wanted it, and her mouth began to shape the yes. No, she said instead. He waited. He was good at waiting. You are not my weapon, she said. If I aim you at them, the story they wrote comes true. I was nothing until a monster made me something.
My name does not go on that.
To Whitney she turned, who had gone very still. They expected me to come for you. The replacement. That is the ending Vivian would have understood. 2 women clawing at each other over a man neither of us should have wanted. Back across the table, she slid the folder toward Whitney, not away from her.
Keep it.
Use it or don't. Your name still opens rooms, mine never will. The truth does cleaner work from inside their own world than from anywhere I could throw it. At the folder Whitney looked, then at her. Why help me? Because they moved us both across the same board and counted on us to blame each other for the bruises. Neesha stood. I would rather disappoint them. The waiting room hummed behind the door. The factory hands, the girls who came in at 3 with the wrong stories, everyone who needed her still awake. 13 months of turning it over in the smallest hour of the night. Whether the humiliation had been something in her. Some cheapness they had all caught at a glance, and she had missed in her own mirror. Now the truth was plain. Nothing had been in her to see. There had only been a plan, drawn 11 days out in a woman's tidy hand, and standing in the middle of it was Neesha, her own building, her own name on the door, the most feared thing in the city keeping his silence in the frame, because she had asked him to. Luck had not carried her through their design. Being exactly the woman they had spent a year trying to talk her out of being that had. The shrinking, the swallowing, the year of telling herself it was fine, no weakness to carry like a stain. That. A trap survived from the inside, and out of it she had walked on her own feet, and the ending was hers to decide now. That was the part they had never planned for. Not the vampire. Not the ring. Her. The next chart she picked up off the rack. Steady, her hand, the way it had been over an open chest in a blackout, the way it had been holding a needle at 3 in the morning, the way it had learned to be long before any of them thought her worth ruining. Go home, Whitney, she said, not unkindly. You already know the way out. Then back to work she went, the way she had always gone back to work, except that this time she was nobody's mercy, and nobody's mistake, and nobody's small thing to be moved. To be saved was not why she married him. That much she had made clear at a chart rack under fluorescent light, a folder of proof squared at her elbow and the next patient already waiting. Whole. She was, before he ever knelt. The weddings, when they came because she chose them. 2 rooms, on her terms, and not one stranger in either who had come to watch her fail. The Waldorf Ballroom in Atlanta held 40 people. The chairs she had counted herself, and taken half of them out. No press. No pews of strangers deciding what she was worth. The ones who came had earned the seat. 2 nurses from the clinic, a widow whose son she had kept breathing through a long January, Whitney Vandergriff in the back with the careful look of a woman learning a new way to stand. 40 faces. Not one there to enjoy her. At the front, in the pale suit he had worn the night he came for her, Andrea stood, and only she knew the cost of standing in that light. His kind did not do this. Rules older than the city governed what he was and what he was allowed to want, and the first of them was to stay unseen. A thing like him did not set his name beside a mortal woman's in a room with the doors open. Findable, it made him. It told every old enemy and every hungry rival exactly where his throat was. A very long time he had lived by belonging to no one, and now he was standing up in front of 40 people to belong to her. This much he had told her, the week before, in the dark of the cold house. I called it discipline for 300 years, he said. Needing no one. I was proud of it. A pause with intention. It was not discipline. It was a wound I decided to admire. No soft answer came to her for that. Her hand went where his heart kept its slow, strange time, and the silence was left to say she had heard him. 2 days later, on the other side of the world, they did it again, and that one was not for the doors or the enemies, or the seat he was risking to be hers. That one was for a woman who had been ash in a box for 3 years, carried home at last. In the green folds of Gujarat her grandmother's village sat, and the family she had never truly known filled a courtyard with hundreds of small clay lamps until the dark had nowhere left to sit. Aunts she had met only twice pressed food on her. Cousins with her own jaw and her own stubborn hairline argued over the music. Her grandmother's language went quick and warm around her, and though half of it went past her, the sound of it did what the English of a whole adult life had never managed. It claimed her. Into the first wedding she had walked an outsider begging to be let in. Into this one she walked and understood she had never once not belonged. The lace she wore, mended. The gown had been, not improved, not gilded, only healed, the fray at the collar drawn back together by a village woman whose hands shook a little and who left, at Neesha's asking, the one crooked stitch near the cuff exactly where Mira's slip had set it 30 years before. To correct that stitch would have been to erase the hand that made it. Some things you keep because they are wrong. The dress no longer smelled of the cedar drawer. Lamp smoke and marigold now, and the fine dust of a country her grandmother had crossed an ocean to leave and never stopped missing. At the edge of the courtyard she stood in the lamplight, in her grandmother's cotton and lace, on the ground her grandmother had walked as a girl, and the joy that came for her did not arrive clean. Up from underneath it came, the way grief comes, taking the knees first. So many years spent being priced by people who had never once been worth her, and she had almost gone a whole life without standing in the one place that would tell her the truth for nothing. Mira was not here to see it. That was the grief folded inside the joy, and there it was let to stay, because a happiness with no grief in it would have been a smaller thing, and small things were finished with her. On the flight over, the second wedding had been a formality, so she had told herself. A duty owed to a dead woman. A closing of accounts. Now, the lamps doubling in her wet eyes, the truth of it landed. The first thing in years that had been entirely for her. Andreas found her at the edge of the light. Never again, that night or after, did he ask her to choose forever. The whole of it he had put in her hands, stepping back from the one power he most wanted to use, because to take her years from her to spare his own grief would have made him only one more person deciding what she was permitted to be. Unmade, the choice sat with her now, hers to keep unmade as long as she liked. She held it the way she held the ring, without hurry, without fear, knowing the full weight of it and choosing, tonight, simply to carry it. Flat against his chest her hand went, over the cold ridge of scar her own hands had made in a blackout a lifetime ago. Without a word from anyone, the old truth settled into her. A career spent deciding, in the worst minute of a stranger's life, who was worth saving. Standing there in her grandmother's hands, on her grandmother's ground, She turned a judgment at last on the one person she had always left off the list, and found, quietly, needing no one to confirm it, that worth saving was what she had been all along. No one had to tell her. That was the whole of it. No one ever would again. The music started. Toward the light her family pulled her, with hands that had wanted her before they ever laid eyes on her. Andreas, the most feared thing on the eastern seaboard, the man who had ended a dynasty between two breaths and broken his own oldest law to stand in a bright room with the doors open, watched her go into the arms of people who loved her and did not follow and did not shield her from any of it.
He did not need to.
The room was hers. It always had been. She had only been the last to know. Across the city, in the good addresses where the oldest power keeps quietest, other women were being handed things they never asked for.
Debts.
Secrets. A colder second life. Out of the dark and into lamplight, Neesha had walked. Not all of them would. There are other women in this city who were handed something they never asked for and had to decide what to do with it. Not all of their nights end at an altar in the sun. If Neesha's reckoning felt like yours, subscribe and stay. This is where those women gather, and there are harder roads than hers still waiting to be walked and told.